This book, as Rebecca mentioned, is it's called Home Waters, A Year of Recompenses on the Provo River. And it's a sort of hybrid combination of environmental writing, environmental history, personal and family history, some theology and meditation, nature writing, all taking place within the confines of the Provo River watershed from the Uinta Mountains to Utah Lake over the course of a year. And a little shameless self-promotion, I am going to be speaking next Saturday up here at the Pioneers Conference at 11 o'clock. And I will actually talk a little bit more about this book and about sustainability. But it was an attempt to try to define a kind of sense of place in Utah that could be Mormon, because that's my background, but cross-cultural, and it could be less exclusionary and more ecologically sustainable. So, and this passage is just kind of an introductory passage based on my introduction. I was born in Utah. I left when I was a 7-year-old boy and came back in 1998. And it was about learning how to fly fish on the Provo River for the first time. We stood knee-deep on a bed of uneven stones that made every step treacherous, especially if you were too eager to cast and failed to measure your footing properly. Light sparkled across the riffles and in the seams created by the larger rocks that occasionally broke the surface or only showed their presence by an unexpected rise of the water. The smell of the water was metallic, a kind of bittersweet amber mixed with pine and washed by turning breezes. Amid the incessant murmuring of the water, darting birds hunted the same insects as the fish. A pathetic fallacy, maybe, but the world seemed tailor-made for us, so much so that I would prefer to tell a story of two native sons fishing like the McLean brothers in A River Runs Through It. But neither of us exactly fit the profile, John for his adoption as a Utahn and I as a prodigal who left too early to have learned the art of compressing eternity into a moment. Don't let your fly slap the water. It has to land unremarkably on the surface. When the fly lands this way, it will drift naturally. Otherwise, you will see the drag of your line on the water and notice the fly moving faster than the current. Fish aren't stupid. They know some idiot is standing downstream waving his arms uselessly in the sun. The key is the point of release, which must show your patience. You can never afford to be overeager. It has to have the look and feel of art, regardless of results. If you start panting like an adolescent in heat, you will never get any action. Despite the occasional politically incorrect sexual metaphor, John spoke in long paragraphs with preacherly intensity, making sure I was listening carefully to his instructions, as if he were teaching me the morality of religion. He pointed to the surface of the river ahead. You see how the river has certain channels or seams. The water is never flowing at one speed and never has one temperature. I could see some white riffles coming down between two large stones to my left, but at my right was a flat stretch of water with an almost mirror-like appearance, reflecting the shadows of the overhanging willows. The river seemed a vast complex of change instead of some nameable entity. Try to fish just off of the faster waters. That's where the food is coming to them, and fish can hold and feed without too much effort. The closer you get to the white riffles where the water is churning the oxygen, the deeper you'll have to fish, because the fish will be down low. But we'll learn nymphing on another day. Always keep an eye out for a rise on the surface. Whenever you see that, you're in business, because they're looking up. I nodded like a young acolyte. And then after some very unsuccessful attempts, I'll skip ahead here. Make sure to pull your line in as the fly drifts downstream, he called from across the river. Don't let your line slacken on the water like that. You'll never have time to set the hook. They're laughing at you. Matter of fact, they tell George jokes. Before long, a fish flashed as it rose and turned, leaving a soft, round, upward impression on the water's surface, and then a slight splash. Then that delayed realization that this is what I had been waiting for. This is why I had been standing here. It wasn't mere chance, even if it felt like mad guesswork. The world had given me its brief notice that I was welcome. As the fish took off downstream and then across the current below me, John watched. I couldn't contain my amazement that below these flowing shallows of bronze and olive, cruising fish hid and hunted their prey. I wanted to say something about this, but all that came out were hoots of pleasure. John started moving toward me to help, yelling serious instructions. "Keep the line taut! Tip up! Tip up!" I did as he instructed, and by the time the fish tired and floated limply to my side, a pile of my orange line had wrapped around my legs. I learned then and there not to argue with results, even when they came without art. I pulled a 14-inch silver rainbow out of the water. Some months later, on a cold October morning, sitting in my car after a successful outing on the river, I mentioned to John that I had lost a brother to suicide when I was 18. I generally didn't make it a habit to mention him at all, since it always seemed to involve having to say and recall more than I wanted to about the past to people I assumed didn't want to know quite so much. But John's friendship was turning out to provide a kind of surrogate sibling relationship for both of us. His gentle and persistent questions were a welcomed opportunity to loosen the recalcitrance of neglect I had allowed Kenny's life and death to suffer. I told him about Kenny's depression, how it struck him hard at the age of 18, and how in those days so little was known about the medical basis of mental illness, and about how as the years progressed his ability to cope with college life declined. At the age of 22, when I was in the midst of my senior year in high school, he inexplicably obtained a gun from a friend and shot himself on the grass in our backyard in Connecticut. Maybe the fact that I had told only a few people before was a sign of my lingering hurt and detachment, since Kenny's death itself felt like a betrayal of my faith in the providential recompenses of life. While I spilled my story in a gush of unexpected emotion, John seemed overwhelmed. We fell into silence. Staring at the foggy window with nothing more to say, it hit me. This bullet that ripped a hole through his head and through your life is why you crave friendship and why you love this river. Months after my mom visited me in California, I got word that she died, John announced suddenly. She killed herself. No explanation, no note. With suffocating grief, he told me that he had recently seen a gray-haired Japanese woman, a leader in the LDS church, in a bookstore in Provo. The similarity was uncanny. Just the sight of her small body and white hair was enough. It was all I could take. After his mother's death, his in-laws moved to Utah, and he and his wife eventually followed. He had taken to calling his mother-in-law Mom, but it wasn't more than a year or so later when she contracted cancer and died, not long before I moved to Utah. It didn't take a genius to figure out why he had to say these things slowly and in fragments. I did my best to absorb the shockwaves. Much of our fishing during that year was clandestine. Our conversations squeezed in during the oddest hours before work or before sunset, and our casts crossing the air like sutures. I have fished many waters since John and I first drove to the cabin, but I will always prefer the rawness and untamed quality of those upper stretches of the Provo, above the dams and away from the pressure of development. They have indeed become my home waters, a place of return and renewal, a chance to explore and reanimate the imagination of memory, and a way to explore the ever-tenuous reasons for my belonging here. The Upper Provo is home to a diverse fish population, as their colors and variety show. Brown trout are an especially deep yellow-green with piercing red spots. Cutthroats have blood red in their gills, and orange slash on the throat, and flashes of silver on the side like the rainbows that contrast with the dark purple-green hue of their backs. Soon after that first day of fly fishing, I began to dream of fish, unlike any kind of dreams I had experienced in my life. In my sleep swam fish of fluorescent brilliance, fish cruising in the clear shallows of some mountain spring water, fish rumbling underneath me when I found myself treading water in a canyon glade, fish leaping into my hands in quivering silence. And in the gray light of dawn, I would awaken as if I had had a revelation. It was the utter physicality of the dreams that gave them their revelatory sensation. But I have had nightmares too. I have seen long, anorexic fish with oversized heads in still waters, gasping desperately. I have dreamt of a Provo River running dry, the waters receded from the banks, exposing fields of stones and muddy flats, narrowed to a thin, slow current of brown. It isn't exactly the burning pitch of Isaiah's apocalyptic vision, but it's close. Before they can be apprehended, the internal workings of water's motions pass into the eye of the imagination. Standing in the middle of a river's moving current, the world seems to be an embrace, a song, maybe a dream, full of changing forms and colors that pass before the eyes, continually dying and being reborn. Whoever said that you can't step into the same river twice, however, never fished as a child. So what if one of them is a fiction to which you return again and again? The same substance, the same sensual reassurance of your belonging in the world, and with each immersion, the same mounting conviction of life's blessedness. It is true and more than lamentable that we misuse, poison, flush, evaporate, and divert water, but we will never destroy it. Water will just move somewhere else in the vast universe where it is more welcome. Time was when rivers were symbols of eternity, the recompense of God's regeneration of this desert world. But their endangerment has made them warning signs of shallow, fragile time, symbols of our own mortality. Our sustainability depends on how we immerse ourselves in the rivers of our imagination. How else can we measure the turning of the world? That's the way of it for me when I stand in that stretch of the upper Provo. Every time I step off the bank and into the water, the shape of the current is noticeably different. The water has risen or fallen. It is muddied, olive, or amber. The banks carved differently than before. Fixed places in the mind are no more fixed than the contours of this river, but my suspension of disbelief and my own imagination allows me to perceive the world's changes. Entering the same waters over and over again, it is finally the fact that I am a breathing and dying body that strikes me as the most strange. This wonderment at my own biology is the gift of the river, a fire of transmutation, repentance maybe, but never stasis. Home waters.